I'm James Atkinson, and this is Drinks Adventures, the podcast where I speak to some of the world's most exciting producers of beer, wine and spirits and explore trends and issues in the drinks industry today. Thanks for joining me again, everyone. In this episode, we take a trip to one of Australia's most exciting drinks companies, Boatrocker, which was champion medium brewery at the Indies Brewing Awards in 2018. Founded in 2009 by Matt and Andrea Houghton, Boatrocker today is home to one of the largest barrel aging facilities in Australian brewing, which you can visit at Braeside in Melbourne's southeast. Matt and his team are undoubtedly making some of the country's finest examples of sour and strong ales, while also excelling at the more commonly available lagers, pale ales and IPAs. And in 2017, Boatrocker Brewing became Boatrocker Brewers Distillers, as the Perth-based distillery Hippocampus was merged into the Boatrocker business, opening up a whole new array of experimentation. I caught up with Matt in Braeside recently, and you can enjoy our chat right after this message from another one of our valued sponsors. Well, Matt Houghton, thanks so much for joining me on the Drinks Adventures podcast.
Thanks for having me.
When Boatrocker first started out, you started out contract brewing and you were making predominantly hop-focused beers, is that right?
That's right. We originally started with the intention of let's start a brewery. From there, the GFC came at the really unfortunate time. So some family investors who were going to invest lost a lot of money and couldn't. We had the recipes, we had the designs. That was a good stepping stone for us to at least see if the market was prepared for something that we were going to make.
So when did you move into starting to make some of these, sour and Belgian sort of styles of beers?
Well, when we first started our brewery, or started building it, was in October 2012, got the keys to the premises. My first thing to buy was 60 used wine barrels from Yarring Station. We were really lucky as well because the winemaker, he liked beer. I did a bit of a part payment, part swapsy for Pilsner, and he threw in the wine racks as well. So I think for 60 barrels and wine racks was 5,000 Australian dollars, which these days is unheard of.
Did you know that there was a customer out there for that style of beer when you set upon that journey?
No. But I figured for $5,000 investment, out of the scheme of things, we had about $420,000 to play with to build the brewery and buy everything, basically, get it all set up. So out of that $5,000 was worth the risk of it not working. At the time, American breweries were doing a lot of barrels, and I really wanted to emulate some Belgian styles. That's sort of what I love and get a lot of satisfaction out of. Travelling to Europe, I'd saved up for a year, working on the premise that my guidebook was going to be Michael Jackson's Pocket Guide to Beer. First port of call was Brussels. Landed at Brussels, went to Cantillon, had never had a sour beer before, but reading the excerpt from his book was, you must see this brewery. The beer is the most unique in the world. And at the time in 1998, it was the most unique thing I'd ever tasted and completely different to beer as I knew it. My wife does all the accounts and the bookkeeping. I didn't tell her until I told her we'd bought the barrels. And her first comment was, aren't we starting a brewery, not a winery? And I said, just trust me, we want to do this, this and this. And thankfully, it sort of came to fruition.
And how many years did it take until you opened the venue across the road, which is the Barrel Room? And maybe you could just talk about what you've got in the Barrel Room.
We were approached by the founders of Little Creatures. They liked what we were doing and they were prepared to invest to build a barrel room, which was something we knew that was probably not back then so much essential as it is perhaps today, essential to have a venue and a front of house of your own, to just give that point of contact. But that started in 2015. At the moment, there are just under 300 barrels of varying types. We've got 36 puncheons, which are 500 litres, maybe 40 hogsheads, which are 300, and then a whole swag of barriques, which are 225. Then we've got a lot of bourbon barrels, mainly from Heaven Hill, Buffalo Trace, Barton. Then we also have a lot of Starwood distillery barrels. We've got one fooder, which is 1,500 litres, which was picked up from an old winery called Stonyfell in South Australia.
Tell me how it works having the creatures guys, Made by Hand is the name of their investment vehicle. Do they have much input, on a week-to-week basis, or is it more just when you call on them? Or
look, I mean, really, they had their ideas at the start when they first invested, but very much they're hands-off. They're purely there as just, if we do need a little bit of advice on certain things, they might be able to give it, but they're purely sort of early investors, allowed us to get that barrel room off the ground and up and running, basically.
one of the things that strikes me, and it's actually one of the things I love about Boatrocker, is, when I look in the fridge when I was just over the road and just see the incredible array of different beers that you have in your portfolio. Thinking back to, I don't know if you listened to the Stone and Wood episode that I did at the beginning of season 2, and I spoke with Howard from Little Creatures, and he was talking about, if you want to go to the next level in terms of scale, you need to sort of have one flagship product. That's obviously not something that they've been pressuring you to do, or is that something that you put pressure on yourself to think, do we need one product that's got to be the flagship Boatrocker product?
Look, we do. I mean, when we first started out, we had Alpha Queen Pale Ale, and then we had the Pilsner. They were our two initial beers. The downside with both those beers is that another hoppy Pale Ale were already being done by so many people. And the Pilsner, it relied on a hop that is so rare, the Rudists hop, which is ridiculously priced. At the moment, it's like $75 a kilo, which is insane. It's an amazing hop, but to use that as your volume vehicle for products is probably a little bit difficult. And I think when Stone and Wood and Little Creatures first started out, I think that mindset is correct. Strangely enough, our flagship beer probably is Miss Pinky, because it's nationwide in all the Dan Murphys. It's about to go into BWS in Victoria, like another 120 stores in Victoria, then First Choice, Liquorland. So bizarrely, that's sort of one of those beers that I'd argue would be our flagship, more so than our Pale Ale.
So it's obviously done really well in Dan Murphy's then.
Yeah, well enough to warrant them putting an order in for 750 cases in midwinter, which is great. It's one of those things where there aren't many beers like it on the market in those sort of stores. I think Dan's has maybe Citré Sour from La Sirène, maybe the Colonial Sour. It's one of those things where it stands alone, which makes it easy for people to perhaps recognise. But if we came out with a Pale Ale, and we're in that situation now with Alpha Queen, which is our first beer, getting lots of pull-through on tap, but to compete at the package level, it really comes down to scale and volume and price. And that's something that we can achieve with Miss Pinky, mainly because we've done so many days and months of trials and testing. With a beer like this, because it does take 2 days to make the wort, you need to really make sure that it's same pH every single time without fail, and has a nice, clean, bright acidity as opposed to any other sort of strange funk.
And is that a beer that you find appeals to, a wide cross-section of people?
It does. A lot of men who come to the barrel room in the early days were hesitant about drinking a pink beer. I don't quite get that, but that's their problem. The one thing that this beer, I guess, has translated beyond is people who don't say they don't like beer. We get quite a lot of people who come in who are there with their partner who love beer, and they often say, "Oh, I don't really like beer." So we'll often give them samples of Miss Pinky, maybe a barrel-aged sour, that they can have an association that's perhaps more akin to wine. The raspberries are recognisable. It's sour, but it's not tear your face off sour. We've got them, but they're different types of beers.
And I was just sort of thinking, this might be your flagship out there in the chains, but arguably Ramjet must be kind of like a flagship in the beer geeks arena as well.
Absolutely, it is. Look, Ramjet's one of those beers that has surpassed any sort of expectation that I ever had for it. It started out with one of our old brewers used to work at Starwood and suggested that maybe we could get some whiskey barrels. I like the idea of making an Australian Imperial Stout aged in a local whiskey maker's barrels. I'd really enjoyed things like KBS, some big American imperial stouts, but they had bourbon barrels, which were not that easy to source at the time. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to make something that was Australian? And we massively undercharged for the first batch, because back then it was 10.5%, I think the first ramjet was, and it was meant to retail for $12 or $11. And we were still thinking, crikey, is anyone going to buy it? It was sort of the time when, I guess, 10.5% beers are not that common. But then it sort of snowballed from there and had really positive reviews on flavour profile. People really did enjoy it. And it probably has, you're right, amongst the beer geeks, it's probably got, that's what people recognise Boatrocker for, I think. It was probably, that's ramjet.
And sometime in the last couple of years, you had the Hippocampus distillery relocated from Perth to here in Braeside. How did that all come about?
Yeah, we were approached, again, made by hand. They had set up Hippocampus in Perth, and I think one of the troubles that, great idea for them at the time, but I think the operational side of things were not that feasible. They approached us and said, would you like to make Hippocampus and bring a distillery into the barrel room? And Andrea and I have always been one for opportunity and what that might lead to. And we said, yeah, okay, let's make it work. So we relocated Hippocampus, and the idea was to obviously continue with Hippocampus products, but also create our own range of Boatrocker products. We're slowly bringing those products out to market. A lot of things revolve around barrels and barrel aging, and those things just take a bit of time, unfortunately. So the distillery arrived in August 2017. Just released our rum. We've got a product that's distilled beer, beer schnapps, beer de vie. Don't really know what to call it yet. Working on that one still. And a whole lot of different things in the pipeline.
The flagship for Hippocampus would be the gin, though?
Probably more so the vodka. There are not many people who are dumb enough to make vodka from scratch, to batch it from Australian wheat flour in a mash mixer and create our own wash. Takes a lot of time from that perspective, and then obviously distilling it 3 times across the road to get it to a point that we're happy with, which is why our vodka does cost more than Grey Goose, and due to the laws and the scale of what we do, but I think also it tastes a lot better too.
What else have you got coming up from a distilling point of view? I mean, you're already doing that for the vodka. There's no plans to start making whiskey?
Look, we're not... I look at Starward and I am amazed at the scale and breadth of that operation. And they've obviously had some sizable investment from larger spirit manufacturers, but I don't know if I want to get to that point where we have 7,000 or 8,000 barrels filled with spirit. That becomes a scale that, whilst it could be exciting in its own right, and I'm constantly impressed with Starward, how they do manage to do lots of little experiments here and there, but they're also limited. Their experiments are around the cask they age in, the previous inhabitant of the cask. Whereas for us, I want to play around with different grain types for different whiskies and end up with, whether it's esoteric or not, maybe we'll strike something that is absolutely fantastic and we will turn it into a volume business. But I think the money required to make a single barrel of whiskey is crazy. So for us, we're not going to become a major whiskey distillery, but I think we'll definitely knock out barrels of whiskey, of which we have some already.
Of course.
Which you'd be silly not to. We did a collaboration with Starward before we even had the distillery, which was we distilled leftover contract brewed beer that had gone out of date. And it's been sitting around. We didn't want to sell it because we were making our own. We didn't know what to do with it. I didn't want to throw it out. So what did we do? We distilled it at Starward. We had 3,000 litres of beer. It was enough to fill up 1 bourbon barrel. And we just let it sit for nearly 4.5 years. The result was a whiskey. I call it a whiskey. A few people disagreed with me on some whiskey forums and beer forums, but it met all legal obligations under Australian law to be called a whiskey. So we called it, and we clarified it, we called it a beer whiskey. That was delicious and unique.
What are some of the beers that you're currently working on that you're most excited about?
One of the beers, I guess, that we played around with recently was not that we're renowned for them, but like a hazy IPA. We'd always sort of shied away from hazies until we knew what we were going to do and how to do it, rather than just, I've had some fairly lackluster IPAs, hazy IPAs. I'd never actually had the real deal from America. At our 10th birthday celebrations, one of our loyal supporters brought a whole swag of freshly flown in 3-week-old American hazy IPAs, and tasting them compared to the local versions, they're actually remarkably different. There is a juicy note there, but they've got bitterness, and it's pronounced. It's not something not at all bitter. And so that set me on this path of, okay, how do we do that? And the whole biotransformation, choosing the hops, that's a lot of fun, working out what will and won't work. So I guess that was probably one of the most recent ones. That's your normal type of beer, but it's anything but normal when you look at the process. The grist was 33% rolled oats, 33% carapils, 33% American ale malt. Then the hop load was insane. And the Americans are doing even more again. Ours was 15 grams per litre of hops, which is absolutely stupid. Thinking a double IPA might be 6 to 8. And you're going, this is nuts. And it's all for non-bitterness. It's all for aroma and flavour. And added 3 times, once during just when Krausen's kicked off, the other third added just as Krausen's tailing off, and then the last third once fermentation's fully finished. And intentionally trying to create a stable haze, which is the antithesis of what we've been working against for so many years. So that was a fun one to do. But then I love sour beers, big imperial stouts, we've got a barley wine. I think that's why you see so many different products in the fridge, because every one of them excites me. A lot of it harks back to traditional process. The wild ales we follow as much as we can with a 2-vessel brew house. We try and follow like a turbid mash system. For pilsners, we lager for 5 weeks, which is just, we think, gives a better flavour profile.
You're pretty much brewing beers and using brewing processes that cover the whole gamut of beer styles, really, within the Boatrocker portfolio.
Pretty much. I look at, from pale ales, pilsners, Berliner Weiss, barrel-aged sours, wild ales, imperial stouts, Asian whiskey barrels. We cover nearly every beer style. I think if you haven't got something that you like about beer, there must be something across the road at the cellar door that you can find that you'd want to drink. If not, you've got spirits. So there's got to be something.
The beer and distilling landscape's just changed tremendously in the last decade that Boatrocker's been around. And in fact, I believe there's another brewery that's coming to the area. What's your feeling for, the current market? Like, do you feel positive about the future for Boatrocker, but also for the industry generally? Yeah, look, running a small business is always hard work, and there's always a fine line on some months, particularly a lot of big retailers and even smaller retailers are trying to extend their terms. And I think we'll probably start seeing more and more of that. We're aware that people like Dan Murphy's and First Choice are 90 days from the end of the month, which is effectively 120 days, and that's what it is. So you plan for it and you're covered. The one thing we know with them is that they will always pay. It's some of these smaller but larger operations, maybe some large pubs and whatever else, they start introducing terms of 30 days from the end of the month, so that's 60 days. And that's not how it used to be. Normally it used to be 14 days. If special events, it might be 30 days. So for us, you get your busy moments, and you get your, like the madness of dealing with growth means that you're putting a lot of cash into growth, and then you have to wait a long time till that money comes back, and that can lead to stretched cash flow and whatever else. But if you plan for it in a proper budget, then you're fine. The new entrants coming in, I think they just have to be prepared for it and be prepared that it will be more competitive. And we've seen that over the last 10 years, how much the industry's grown. I think when we first started out Gypsy Brewing, contract brewing, in 2009, I think we're 170 odd breweries nationwide. There's now nearly 700. That's insane. People want something new all the time. And that's, in some ways, is going to end up eating itself as a way to get to market, because the quality is going to dip, and there have been some pretty atrocious beers put to market just to come up with something new, or it's
a minor variation on the theme that I don't know if that's a good thing for the public, and whether they'll start shifting back towards more approachable beers or just consistent quality beers. I think that's the key. If you can be consistent in quality and be good quality, then you should do well. But yeah, I fear for some of the new entrants coming in. I think the market's a lot more unforgiving, and with so many brands on the shelf, they can just, if they don't like you, they'll move on and forget about you and try something else. So it'll be a tough gig, definitely.
What does the next 10 years hold for Boatrocker? You obviously don't have a huge amount of room to keep growing where you are currently, but do you expect to just stick with these 2 sites, or are you looking to grow?
Yeah, look, we'd like to grow. It's one of those things that I think humans have never gotten around a way to be sustainable without growth, be it in any industry. It's always around growth. We can knock out, with the current layout of this brewery, about 400 to 450,000 litres of beer per annum. So we've got a little bit of time to go. We're not a big brewery in output. The barrel room itself really is reaching that point where we can probably fit in another 100 barrels, absolute max. And then
where are you going to put those?
I don't know. But, so I say 100, but yeah, it's one of those things where maybe we can't. Maybe it's only 50 barrels. Already we're playing Tetris with moving things around, which is frustrating for the brewers and the bar staff as well, because everything is operational Monday through Friday up until about midday, and it's like, crikey, we've got to open in 2 hours, clear everything out, bring the tables out, and then we set up for the weekend, and then it goes away again. So it's not an ideal scenario from a venue, and if we were to choose somewhere bigger, it would need to be, the convenience of having one site would be fantastic. Just like, it's fine being across the road, but it's also quite annoying, especially when you leave your drill or your keys or something over there, and then you come back and you realise you've forgotten something else and have to duck back. It's my only chance to get exercise in the day.
Nothing on the immediate horizon, though, there?
No, look, I think what we want to do is grow the venue currently. It's amazing how much an outdoor space, which we got licensed just before last Christmas for an outdoor section. Since then, we've pretty much doubled volume of people coming to the barrel room every week and growing. So that's really good. So if we can help develop that more and make that more of a customer experience. We are in the middle of an industrial precinct, so we are a destination venue, but it's one of those things, I think, where if we can make the punter happy and they can keep their kids happy and have a couple of quiet drinks and listen to some music, then that's probably an area. I think if we can really max that out, then that might be another 2 or 3 years in that space, and then we'll have to start looking for somewhere else.
Well, Matt, been a pleasure chatting to you, and best of luck for the next decade.
Thank you. I'll probably be fully grey-haired by then, but much appreciated.
No worries.
The Drinks Adventures podcast is produced by me, James Atkinson, with additional production and mixing by Dave Robertson. You can find complete transcripts, links, and other information on the show at drinksadventures.com.au. You can follow me on all social media platforms at @ByJamesAtkinson, like my Facebook page, James Atkinson Drinks Adventures, to be kept informed of podcast giveaways and other news about the show. The Drinks Adventures podcast needs your support as listeners. Please do us a favour and leave an honest review and rating for the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. We love hearing your feedback, and it helps inform other people this is a show worth listening to. Or simply drop us a line at hello@drinksadventures.com.au.